Thank you for tuning in to the Practical Preservation Podcast. Please take a moment to visit our website, practicalpreservationservices.com, for additional information and tips to help you restore your historical home. If you've not done so, please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, and also like us on Facebook. Welcome to the Practical Preservation Podcast, hosted by Danielle and Jonathan Kepperling. Kepperling Preservation Services is a family-owned business based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, dedicated to the preservation of our built architectural history for today's use as well as future generations. Our weekly podcast provides you with expert advice specific to the unique needs of renovating a historic home, educating by sharing our From the Trenches preservation knowledge and our guests' expertise, balancing modern needs while maintaining the historical significance, character, and beauty of your period home.
Today on the Practical Preservation Podcast, I have Storm Cunningham from the Reconomics Institute. Storm, thank you for joining me today.
Hey, Danielle, thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, so tell me about your background.
Whoa, how far back do you want me to go? I'm about to turn 70 this year, so that could take a while. But let's start with my focus on all of this redevelopment, restoration, revitalization, regeneration, all this stuff that is my professional focus these days. Yes. You could say, in a way, it started with a scuba diving trip. Way back in the old days, I was a diver on a Special Forces, Green Beret team. And the Army taught me that you can actually be paid to do fun stuff. Although they tended to take the fun out of it.
I think that's the job.
But ever since then, I've been convinced that there got to be ways to earn your living in ways that are really enjoyable and satisfying. And so I stuck with the scuba diving. And in the 80s, a German scientist who was working in Jamaica on trying to restore their coral reefs, which had been 90% destroyed by that time, was looking for volunteers to come down, divers, to help him put his experiments on the ocean floor. So I went down there for a week and helped him out. And he showed me the places he had already restored. And it was just amazing that, and I always consider coral reefs to be one of those things that once it's destroyed, it's never coming back, because they take tens of thousands of years to aggregate. And he showed me places that had been total dead zones just 6 months earlier that were now swarming with life. And so that's when it struck me that we don't have to be satisfied with just sustainable development. The world is in really sad shape right now. We're losing hundreds of species every month. Cities, economies are going downhill fast. Got all kinds of social problems.
Right.
So who wants to sustain this mess?
Right.
So what we need now is to start undoing the damage we've done over the past few centuries, and reconnecting and revitalizing and restoring the natural and built and socioeconomic environments that we've created.
I agree with you. And actually I mentioned when we were setting the interview up that I was introduced to your book, The Restoration Economy, from John Leake, probably 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. And that was the first time I had realized that preservation and that work that we do was part of a bigger revitalization effort including the, restoring the brownfields and all of the other, areas of the environment. So the built environment plus the natural environment. So that was really a big, aha moment for me. So thank you for sharing that so that I could have that insight.
Yeah, there are all kinds of people who are part of the restoration economy that don't know it, because they're just focused on their particular piece of it, which is, valuable and satisfying. But it's also exciting to find out that it's part of an overall trend of regenerating the planet.
Yes, yes. So why did you, I guess you kind of answered this, but if you have more to tell me about, feel free. Why did you decide to focus on the renewal, the social, the economic, and the natural resources?
Well, I mean, it started with the natural side. That's my first love. Most people think of me these days as an urban regeneration guy, but
Right.
really I kind of fell into that just because in some ways, I mean, restoring an ecology is certainly complex and challenging, but revitalizing cities and neighborhoods is even more complex
Oh, yes.
because it includes restoring the natural environment, but then you have to focus on infrastructure renewal and renewing old buildings and, cleaning up brownfields like you mentioned, and,
Right.
And then all the social issues, the safety issues, policing, all kinds of things that are destroying neighborhoods these days. So it's vastly more complex. So that's where I tend to gravitate towards the complex.
Yeah, and there's multi-layers. Not that there aren't multi-layers in the ecology, but there's many more layers. Plus, you throw people in, and people always make things more complicated.
Yep.
So tell me about the work that you do with the Reconomics Institute, Revitalization, and the Global Regeneration Team.
Yeah, well, Revitalization is the journal I've been editing for the last almost 7 years now. It's got over 8,000 articles in it, all focused on some aspect of because it covers the natural environment, the built environment, socioeconomic environments, and it's global, and it covers all of the different disciplines, from the designers, the architects and engineers, to the planners, to the, various technical experts, but also the elected officials, the nonprofits, the citizens who all want to be involved in this in some way. So it covers a lot. And I've been, you can take a look at that at revitalization.org. And the current issue is always free to everybody. Subscriptions only needed if people want to access those back articles.
Okay.
So it's a publication of the Reconomics Institute, which I created to fill the most important single gap that was really holding places back from coming back to life. And that's the lack of a strategic process. I mean, if you talk to any business person who's responsible for reliably producing something, whether they're manufacturing cars or clothing or peanut butter or whatever it might be, they know that to do that, you have to have a process.
Right.
Farmers know you have to have a process. If you want to turn seeds into a finished crop, there's a process to that.
Yes.
The only people who don't seem to understand the importance of process are the people who run cities and regions, who are focused on, who have the job of making a place more resilient or revitalizing it in some way. There, it all turns into just this mess of projects. Just haphazard projects, stop, start. Right. Mostly reactive, the elected officials are just reacting to what developers propose. Yeah. And there's no real process to it.
With the elected officials, it's also, depending on who's elected, if the project's it's still important.
But it's the same problem. It doesn't matter about the politics, whether they're conservative or progressive.
Yeah, I agree.
They both lack process.
Yeah, I agree.
So, I mean, some of them are pursuing the wrong objectives in a bad way. In other words, other ones are pursuing the right objectives in a bad way.
Right.
Either way,
you're getting the same place. Yeah.
Yeah. So my most recent book, Reconomics, which came out last year, documents what I've discovered over the last quarter century to be the reliable process that helps places come back to life. And this is all invented on a local level by communities all over the world who knew intuitively there had to be a process to this, but nobody had ever really documented it. So, they put it together, but they never really knew whether they had a complete process because they had no template to work from, to take a look and see if there were any gaps in it. So that's what I put into my most recent book. And then everybody kept saying, well, how do I hire people who know how to get this communities revitalization or resilience initiative all put together, who understand this process well enough to teach it locally and to help us implement it locally. So that's why I put together the Reconomics Institute, and we actually certify people online to as revitalization and resilience facilitators.
Now, are those facilitators, are they mostly like city planners, or what is their background typically?
They're all over the map.
Is that okay?
Because it's not, you don't just, community shouldn't just have one.
Right.
You know, one of the key principles of resilience is redundancy. You don't want to rely on just one bright person. The more people in your community at all levels, whether they're just concerned citizens or leading a nonprofit or a business or a government agency or whatever it might be, the more of them who understand the process of bringing a place back to life, the more likely it's going to actually happen.
Right.
So the people who have been certified so far run the gamut from private consultants to engineers and designers to planners, mayoral candidates who figure, I mean, one of the most common things you'll hear any mayoral candidate promise is revitalization. I mean, they all promise it.
Yeah, they all say that.
The problem is that almost none of them have any qualifications to make such a promise, because they have no idea how to make revitalization happen.
That's very true.
So now more candidates, not just mayors, but governors too, are realizing that they don't necessarily need to get certified themselves, but they at least need to have a few certified people on staff who know how to make their promises happen.
Yeah, that's very smart. So I am, did we talk about the global regeneration team?
No, that's, we originally started this, it was going to be kind of the ongoing training for our refacilitators. That's what we normally call these revitalization resilience facilitators. We normally just shorten it to refacilitator. And these are the people who put re after their name when they get certified. And so we wanted to create a series of monthly videos and weekly podcasts to help these people stay up with the latest trends and techniques and everything. And then we realized, well, heck, if we're going to have all these podcasts and videos available, why not just make them available to the general public? So everybody, especially students, I mean, we need more young people regenerating the planet. So, and they're oriented towards watching 20-minute videos and listening to hour-long podcasts while they're exercising. So instead of putting it on our website, we put it on the Patreon website. Which is used by a lot of podcasters and artists, and it makes for a very simple, accessible way for everybody to get it. So if you go to Patreon, it's Patreon/Reconomics, or you can just search on the site for Regeneration Team, and it'll pop right up.
Okay, I think that the one really important thing that the internet has provided is that flow of information and allowing it to be accessible to more people. And I think that is very important. So when I was on your website, I noticed that you had the Restorative Career Symposium, and I was curious about that. And then as we were going back and forth, I think you said you do it at colleges. Is that correct?
Yeah, most of them takes place at universities. I've done it at University of Virginia and University of Texas. And I mean, I did a 2-day workshop at Harvard because it's really kind of almost a universal desire amongst young people today is, they've inherited a world that's in really, really nasty condition. And the future is not looking so great, especially with the climate crisis. So a lot of them, if not directly, they at least want to indirectly be able to improve that situation. So every time one of these universities starts putting up posters about one of these restorative careers symposia that I do, the halls are always packed. It's always standing room only. The trouble is that in most cases, the students go back to their curricula and they look for degrees or diplomas or certifications or whatever in these restorative and regenerative disciplines, and it's really hard to find.
You have to be creative and kind of make your own path, I would think.
Yeah, it's getting easier. I mean, if you go to revitalization.org, one of the pages we have in every issue is education.
Oh, that's
And you
great.
click on that and you'll see a whole list of degree courses, either undergraduate or master's, sometimes doctoral, that are directly related to regenerating the world in some way.
And yeah, I think that there is a desire for people to have work that matters. And I think that the restorative careers definitely, gives you that. You can work, you can make money, but you're also, doing something that's impacting more than just yourself.
Right.
So tell me, or explain to me the concept of the global restoration economy.
Well, it's really a trend. It's kind of inevitable, although it's taken people by surprise how quickly it's come on. But if it's just common sense, really, if you take a growing population and put them in a finite space, like we're on a finite sized planet
Right.
now. When we started building civilizations, 5,000, 6,000 years ago, or 12,000, whichever marker you want to put in there, but organized agriculture really kicked off about 5 millennia ago in the Fertile Crescent, and it was at that time when we invented agriculture that we started creating permanent settlements. And when you do that, you start getting permanent buildings and permanent infrastructure. And over time, what happens is your economy initially is based purely on new development,
Right.
on sprawling your city into the natural areas and chopping down forests to create farms. And then the city sprawls more and you pave over your farms with new city. And, so there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's how you grow a brand new civilization. But again, when you're in a finite place, there are natural limits to that. Eventually, you're going to realize that you just can't keep sprawling. You can't keep basing your economy on the extraction of non-renewable resources. Right. So if you want to keep your economy growing, you have to switch over from this new development or sprawl mode, or this extractive, destructive mode, over to a restorative mode. So you need to start basing your economic growth on revitalizing the communities you've already created and on restoring the natural resources that were damaged along the way. And the great news is that you can make just as much money restoring the planet as you can destroying it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That and yeah, there's so much, and that was another concept that I took away from reading The Restoration Economy, was the amount of construction waste that is generated. And that, and like the concrete is so hard on the planet, all the sand that we have to extract from to make concrete. Like, it's just, there's so many things that about building new buildings that is really hard on the planet.
Right.
Yeah. So I totally, from my perspective, that really makes a lot of sense to me. But it's the sprawl, and people seem to be wanting to work against that, but then there are the people who just want new, and they don't want to deal with anything different.
A lot of them are architects. They're they're ego driven. They don't want to work on somebody else's design. They want to make their own mark on the world.
Yeah,
that's
very true.
I was involved in the early days of the U.S. Green Building Council when they were creating the LEED certification system. And I was always the one in the back of the room jumping up and down saying, well, what about existing buildings?
Right.
And they had no interest in it.
No.
And I said, well, what about location? How much sense does it make to put a green building with solar panels on it 50 miles outside of town where people have to drive for an hour?
Everybody has to. Yeah.
And they weren't interested in that either. It took almost 20 years for those sorts of things to get embedded in LEED.
Yeah. So tell me about your 3 books. I've referenced The Restoration Economy a couple of times, and then you have Rewealth, and then the Reconomics, The Path to Resilient Prosperity.
Right. Yeah. So the first one was originally going to be a book on sustainable development. I started writing it in 1996, and got about a year into it and realized that the book was boring me. So I decided to separate all of the research I had done into 2 piles, a boring pile and an exciting pile. And the smaller exciting pile, I noticed everything in there started with re.
Right.
And that's when I realized, whoa, look at all this. I mean, We've got projects here that are multi-billion-dollar projects that are restoring natural systems like the Everglades. You've got all of these new restorative disciplines that are like brownfields. You know, when I started writing the restoration economy in 1996, the EPA had only just created their brownfields program the year before.
Oh my goodness!
You know, so this is really, you know, fresh stuff that people hadn't heard about. And so I created kind of a taxonomy of the restoration economy, put it into 8 categories, 4 of them on the natural side and 4 of them on the built side. So you could kind of look at that first book as being kind of the ingredients of revitalization, the different kinds of projects you can do.
Yes.
But what was really needed was what was in the second book, which was the recipe for those ingredients. How do you put together all of those different kinds of restoration, revitalization, redevelopment, you know, whatever, to create what people really want, which is more jobs, higher quality of life, you know, economic growth.
Right.
You know, so they needed a recipe for the ingredients. And that's what I put in the second book from McGraw-Hill in 2008 called Rewealth. And I had a bunch of case studies in there, really dramatic stories like Chattanooga that went from the most desperate and filthy city in the United States to a global revitalization poster child in a very short period of time. And that's when I realized that was the beginning of the awakening to process, because they were the first city I've encountered to actually create a complete renewal process. And so that became the primary focus of my third book, Reconomics, which just came out last year. Is, you know, here's the what you could call the minimum viable process. These are all the steps your community needs to have in order to reliably produce resilience or revitalization, or both. You know, put them together and you get resilient prosperity. And so you can add to the process, but you can't take away from it, because a process with missing elements is not a process.
Yeah. So that's the minimum. Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I was thinking too, you know, when you said like resilient economic, I think you said, did you say resilient economic development? Was that the phrase?
Resilient prosperity.
Prosperity. Yeah. Prosperity.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Like there's a finite amount of land that we can develop, but there's always, you know, maintenance and things that need to be done on the infrastructure that we have. So to me, that makes it resilient.
Yeah, and it's not just the built land either. You know, agriculture. When the restoration economy came out, I had a chapter on restorative, or what these days is mostly called regenerative agriculture. Mm-hmm. One of the first books to even mention it, and you know, like I said, I started writing that in the mid-90s. And only in the last 4 or 5 years has regenerative agriculture really taken off. And that's the process basically of bringing a farm back to life, or a ranch, you know, after abuse by, you know, factory style farming, you know, that depletes the topsoil and kills the biome in the soil and wipes out the local native pollinators and destroys the watershed. And so regenerative agriculture reverses all that. You know, with each passing year, you have more topsoil and better topsoil. With each passing year, your watershed is healthier and you've got more native pollinators. So you're not relying on these disease-prone European honeybees like most people are. And the great thing about it is you can make more money at it. It's not that regenerative agriculture produces bigger yields. In some cases, it's actually a slightly smaller yield. But what it does is greatly cut down on expenses, because you're not plowing your fields anymore. You're not coating them with expensive pesticides and herbicides and chemical fertilizers. And in some cases, you know, it's reduced farmers' expenses by 2/3. Which means that even with a 10% reduction in their productivity, their bottom line has tripled or quadrupled.
Right. That I would think that would make it attractive to them.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think that that's so important. I feel like sometimes we as humans just in general have a very short memory. And because I was reading last year, the book, it was called The Prairie Fires. It was the book about Laurel Ingalls Wilder and that the family going west and
Mm-hmm.
having all the problems and the dust bowls and everything. And I'm thinking
Right.
they were ruining the land then too. And you know, so we just go in these cycles. So what trends or challenges do you see in the restoration economy?
It's these days, it's mostly a matter of getting people out of this project mindset. You know, there's a huge organization called the Project Management Institute. It's got like 300,000 members worldwide. Everybody's focused on project management, and so few are focused on program management. And a program is when you put together multiple projects and coordinate them in a way to get synergies and efficiencies. And cities definitely desperately need this programmatic, process-oriented approach in order to more efficiently spend the limited amount of funding they have. And it's just desperately difficult to get people out of this project mindset. And it's mostly because, well, it's two things. One is that most cities don't have anybody who's really dedicated to revitalizing the place. Like I said, they usually just sit around waiting for somebody else to propose something, usually a real estate developer, and then react to it. So it's very passive. You know, it's like they're storekeepers waiting for somebody to walk through the door. And so the other problem is planning, not planning per se, but plans.
Right.
There's kind of a huge scam going on in this country, not just this country, but probably worse in this country than anywhere else, in that elected leaders hate risk, but they love the appearance of action. So what they've discovered is that they can get really good publicity by commissioning a plan. You know, they'll commission a plan, whether it's from their own staff or from some outside planning firm. And all they have to do is allocate the money, and they get up in front of the press and say, look, we've got a new revitalization plan or comprehensive plan on the way. And, you know, it's a guaranteed win. It's positive press and there's no risk. All they have to do is write a check. And then a year or so later, the plan arrives, another press event, and they hold the plan up, wave it around, and say, here, now we've got a plan to revitalize the place. Still no risk. Problem comes with implementation. That's when all of a sudden, if you try to implement it and it doesn't work, you've got a failure on your records. So the plan just goes onto a shelf, and 5 years later, the mayor gets up in front of the press and says, our plan needs to be renewed and updated. So we're going to commission an updated plan. And this just goes on and on and on. And like I said, it's kind of a scam because the planning firms know it. In many cases, these plans they're putting out are 80% boilerplate because they know nobody's ever going to read it. I've got a friend who is an award-winning urban planner who joined the American Planning Association in the last few years of his career before he retired. And I met him in his office at the APA a day or two before he left, and was telling him about this new book, Reconomics, that I was just about to finish, and asked him, bottom line, what's the situation in planning? And he said, well, it's kind of like General Eisenhower said, planning is good, but plans are useless. He said, my definition of a plan is a list of crap that nobody ever looks at. And, you know, and that's from a top American Planning Association official. That's how bad the situation is. And the problem isn't just the money that's being wasted on plans that are never implemented. The problem is that now people think something's happening, so nothing else happens.
Yeah, and that's very
They've got the illusion that things are underway and nothing is underway. The plan is the end unto itself.
Yeah, and that's very true. And I have seen those stacks of plans. So I completely understand what you're talking about. They do, and unless you implement it, it doesn't mean anything.
Yep.
So, is there anything that you thought that you wanted to share that maybe I didn't think to ask you while we were talking?
Well, the title of your podcast is Practical Preservation.
Yes.
Are your listeners mostly interested in historic preservation?
Typically, yes.
Yeah, okay. So I haven't really mentioned that a whole lot. I mean, we've got obviously everybody knows about the excellent Main Street program in
Yes.
this country that tries to combine the reuse and renovation of historic structures with downtown revitalization. And they certainly do an excellent job on that. The downside of it is they tend to have two limitations. One is that they tend to be primarily focused on downtown, although they have made some efforts, I think they call it Elm Street,
yes. Yeah,
to kind of get out into the inner ring suburbs. I haven't seen a whole lot of progress on that lately, but the other problem is that by being primarily focused on historic assets, they tend to pretty much overlook the entire natural environment. I mean, yeah, they'll make some efforts to do green renovations of these historic buildings, but by not focusing or incorporating, watershed restoration, and to a large degree, even surprisingly, there's not enough focus on brownfields, even though a lot of brownfields have historic buildings on them.
Right.
In many cases, the historic buildings themselves are brownfields.
Yes.
But and infrastructure renewal, all these sorts of things, and they'll get involved in that in a little bit with downtown streetscaping. But there's so much. It could be so much more powerful if they had a more comprehensive process that actually renewed all of the socioeconomic and natural and built assets. And it's there again, when you're a historic preservationist, you tend to be focused on historic buildings, and buildings by nature are projects. They're not programs. It's only at the neighborhood or community level.
That's why all construction jobs are considered temporary, because they're project based.
Right.
But
so if more historic preservationists were to get certified as refacilitators, then they'd be in a great position to expand their practice. Because now they're not just helping the city make better use of its older buildings. Now they can actually help them create an ongoing, comprehensive revitalization and resilience program.
That really makes sense to me. And I've often, I've had several different podcast guests on to talk about the intersection of, sustainability and preservation, because they do overlap, even though the two groups don't talk to each other very often.
Yeah, I was actually at the world's very first event that combined historic preservation and sustainability. It happened right here in Washington, D.C.
Oh, was it? Yeah.
At Arlington Cemetery, strangely enough. And they had a brand new building there, the Women's Museum for Women in Military Service. And they used the meeting room there, and the title of the symposium was "What's So Green About Historic Preservation?" And it was the first time that the two subjects had been formally brought together. And it sponsored a whole new trend. So I was very happy to be able to witness the birth of that trend.
Yes, yeah, I think it's very important. I think that the two groups definitely have more in common than they probably realize, and they just need to communicate. So your work helps with that, and I thank you for that. So do you have any offers for our listeners? I know you have your books. I didn't know if you have seminars or anything else going on. You mentioned your the Global Regeneration team that you can go on
Right. Well, you can see everything I do at stormcunningham.com, which includes all the speaking and the books and all that sort of thing. But you mentioned offer. It's not on the website right now, but there's an offer that's still active that I can tell you listeners about. On Reconomics.org, which is the Reconomics Institute. If somebody's interested in becoming a refacilitator, the normal tuition is $299 for the entire program. And on the enrollment form, there's a coupon code field. And we used to have a coupon code to help people out during this whole COVID-19 economic crisis. And it's not on the website anymore, but the code is still active. So if people get in there fairly soon, when you get to that, the payment page and you see the coupon, just type in the word crisis.
Crisis, okay.
Yeah, and it'll knock $100 off your tuition.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. And how long is the program?
Well, it's actually done according to your own timetable.
Okay.
There are
like
3 books you
online.
need to read, and the testing is all online. So we've had some people who were in a real hurry who knocked it out in like 3 or 4 weeks. We've had other people who are still working on it a year later.
Yes.
They're just whenever they have the time. And a
it.
lot of those are students. They're still working
Right.
towards their degree, so they're not in a real big hurry to get certified because they can't use it until they graduate.
Yes. Yes. Well, thank you very much for that. And how can our listeners contact you?
Storm@reconomics.org is my email. And the phone number in Washington, D.C. is 202-684-6815.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time and you sharing your knowledge with me today.
Thanks, Danielle. Thanks again for having me on your program.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Practical Preservation Podcast. The resources discussed during this episode are on our website at practicalpreservationservices.com/podcast. If you received value from this episode and know someone else that will get value from it as well, please share it with them. Join us next week for another episode of the Practical Preservation Podcast. For more information on restoring your historic home, visit practicalpreservationservices.com.